This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hey, welcome to the Extra Point. I am Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps in Discipleship pastor here at Southridge Church, and I'm with Pastor Jared. He is our worship pastor, and I don't know that you've been on here before, but I'm excited to have you today. And then Pastor Jess, she's our children's pastor, Jess Beha, Pastor Scott's sister, if you don't know. But we're here today and to dive deeper into our Sunday teaching that we had from Scott, who is out of town. So we're going to look a little different today. But before we go any further, I just want to make sure that if you haven't liked or subscribed to this podcast, you go ahead and do so. That way you don't miss out on any new content. Well, Pastor Scott said this was our 6-month anniversary of our series, the Rise and Fall series, where we've been going through 1 Samuel, kind of been going through it little by little. This second part of it is kind of chapter by chapter. But so we were in 1 Samuel chapter 30 this past Sunday, and we have one more week of this, and then it is done until we get into 2 Samuel next year.
Next year. You'll
have a little break. But he talked about how true faith leads to submission. Submission is kind of a hard thing in life. It can be challenging, to do, whether it's with our bosses, in our relationships, and I think especially at times with God. How have you all seen maybe a contrast of submission and self-reliance in your lives? And how do you recognize in those moments that, I'm not really submitting? Maybe I'm relying on myself a little bit more to maybe have that course correction in the first place. How do we notice that or are aware of it?
So if you look at your life, your whole life, you're growing up, you've got this relationship between you and your parents, right? And so you are constantly doing what they are asking you to do. And there comes a moment in your life to where you grow up, you move out, and you're like, I'm doing things on my own, right? I've got my job. I've got bills that are now in my name. I am so self-reliant. I'm pats on back. I'm making my payments for my insurance. And so you're on top of the world. And if you don't have a relationship with Christ until you're later on in life, like I did, it was an eye-opening experience, to say the least, because I had done so much for myself and relied on myself in everything that I had ever done. And now that I'm giving my life to Jesus, submitting to someone is a very difficult task. Submitting to what God wants me to be doing as opposed to what I would want to be doing is a difficult thing. But the more that you trust God with that submission in your life, the more that you realize, okay, this is a really good relationship. But it is difficult. I mean, how many times have we fought our parents growing up, and we just didn't want to do those things?
I don't know that Jess did that. She's
Me?
Pretty.
You didn't fight your parents on anything?
I did.
Yeah. I mean, I still fight my parents today, and they live 1,800 miles away,
Yeah.
And but just realizing that this relationship is super beneficial whenever I fall in line with what God is asking me to do. Time and time again, he has proven himself, even in the difficult things. Nobody wants to move away from family.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to live, a 2-day trip away from my parents if something happens to them medically. That's a difficult thing to be so far apart from them. But because God has said, hey, you need to move to West Virginia and submit, I just say yes and look at the relationships that we have built and formed, and look at what God has done through Southridge Church. It's not just because of me. It's because of this group of individuals that has said yes to it. It's not just what's going to happen on an individual level, but whenever you say yes to what God is asking you to do, then there's this group of people that are all on board with what God is asking us to do. and submitting to that. And so
Yeah.
it's just been amazing to see.
Yeah, that's cool.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
So it was about that contrast between submission and self-reliance. Like, how do you recognize that in your life when you're doing one or the other? Like, how do you maybe realize, oh, I'm relying on myself more than God, and correct that?
Yeah, I think for me, at least, it has always been, I know that I'm relying on myself when my anxiety and things like that start to get the best of me.
Oh, yeah.
That's when I know that it's like, Jessica, just stop. When my brain can't turn off, when I'm like questioning every single decision. And it's like, he's talked a little bit about this yesterday. Like, how many times are you going to pray about it till you just know that it's the right thing to do and you just do it? You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's one of those things. Like, it's that over and over and over and over type of mentality of just like, I don't want to do this. 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 But knowing in the back of my mind that like I'm supposed to be doing this.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like that, almost like that scale of like, here's where I'm at. But I can tell like with my actions, I can tell with my anxiety. My anxiety gets a lot worse on those types of things. Like when I'm trying to take care of it myself, it seems like nothing ever falls into place when I try to do things on my own. And I do. I mean, we've talked about this before, but I'm very independent. And so I'm very much the type of person that I want to do it myself. Like if I can do it myself, I'm just going to do it myself. And I have to rely on other people. And so that's not easy. And that's a hard lesson that I've had to learn. And so knowing that that's not just in like day-to-day life, but in everything, like in every single aspect of my life, I have to rely on God.
Yeah.
Not just on like the big things or the little things, like everything in between. Because if not, then I'm setting myself up for failure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this one's a little hard for me. I feel like because of my life, like growing up and stuff, I had to be self-reliant in a way. But I also see that there were a lot of times like I really had to rely on God even in that, like to know that, okay, I don't know how this is going to work out, but here I am, God. You know, as a little child before I knew God, I had to learn to cook and clean for myself and do all these things for myself. And then even like later on when I'm working and I'm doing all this, like my parents don't have the money that like, so I can go and work. Like I got my work permit early so I could work early in life. And all these things. So, and we talked with my group, I shared about how like when I worked in restaurants and stuff, it was really easy for me if I wanted to do something, I just picked up an extra shift to get more tips to do it. Like it was really simple, you know what I mean? But now it's one of those things that it's like a whole different idea and concept because we make a salary here, but that salary isn't just like a normal job salary. Like our pay literally comes from God's people who choose to give. And so it gives this whole different like aspect in my mind when I am buying things or purchasing things or whatever. I have to really think like, I think a lot more about how I'm spending that money and what I'm putting it towards and that kind of thing. And so I feel like it's a little easier to submit in different ways and those things. But I find it harder to submit in the small things than it is the big things. And I think that when I really sit back, sometimes it's after I've made a mistake that I can sit back and be like, oh, yeah, you didn't do what God told you to do in that. And I think that's the hard part. Like, and hopefully, though, that mistake and that moment helps you for in the future, you don't make that same kind of mistake.
Well, the bigger things are more visible to people. So it's real easy to say yes and do the things that people are going to see because, I mean, who doesn't want to be appreciated or congratulated on something, you know, that, you know, succeeds or whatever. But like the larger things are more visible to more people. It's the smaller things. It's the making the decision to not look at certain stuff while you're in the restroom and you've got your phone in your hand. It's the decision to, you know, maybe take 5 minutes before you go to bed and read a little bit of your Bible, or maybe read, a pastor's book, on whatever topic. Just anything that just helps grow your relationship with the Lord. It's waking up or waking up in the morning, and the first thing you do instead of going wake up kids or start to get ready, it's taking 5 minutes just to say, God, thank you so much for praying, or for giving me life today, the breath in my lungs.
Yeah.
And it's just those things that God is asking. We all know that he's asking us to do those things, but it's super difficult whenever nobody else is going to see those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also like there might be times, so with Saul and David in the story that we've been following, there were also times that Saul, because all the eyes were on him, and he felt this pressure for some reason, like to please them or to show himself as worthy or whatever to them, that he made some really grave mistakes, which is ultimately what ended up, leading to the rejection, because he wouldn't submit to God. Like, he was doing things instead of waiting for Samuel to come. Like early in the story, we saw instead of waiting for Samuel to come and do the burnt offering, the sacrifice, Saul does it himself. Because everybody was waiting, everybody was watching, everybody was whatever. And I think sometimes we can have to be very careful in those moments of like, am I doing this for other people or am I doing this for God? And it's that submission of, I don't care what anybody else thinks or says or whatever. I really care only about God.
Yeah.
But so have you had a time where you felt, and I think you shared a little bit, so maybe we'll kick it to Jess for this one, where you felt called to submit to God's guidance, even if it was hard, and how has that impacted you?
Yeah. I'm just thinking just recently for me, for anyone who hasn't had a conversation with me probably in the last month, at the beginning of November, I had a doctor's appointment, and I had gone into the doctor on a Tuesday and was thinking I was going to be told that I had PCOS, which was, for me in my brain at that point, it was something I could handle. Like you and I had talked about it.
Yeah.
I was like, it was something I could handle. And within 5 minutes of talking with this doctor, I went from, I can handle PCOS diagnosis, like that's not the end of the world, like, whatever, to hearing the word cancer within 5 minutes. And my whole world felt like it was coming down around me. I didn't take anyone to the appointment with me. I didn't think I needed to do that. I was completely by myself, and I sat there and continued to hear the doctor tell me that out of the 5 criteria, I had 4 of the 5 criteria for endometrial or uterine cancer, and she told me numerous times that I was, or that she was very concerned. There was concern. I had red flags, and it was just this over and over and over, like instant whatever, I don't know, fear, I guess. And I remember I was getting ready to leave, and there was a mirror in the hospital or in the room, and she's like, you're going to have to go get tests done, whatever. And I looked in the mirror and I was like, don't you cry. Don't you cry. You're not crying when I'm walking out of here. Got in the elevator. I'm like, don't you cry. Don't you cry. I got in the car and I just lost it. Like just hysterically started crying. Called my mom, called, my dad, my brother, everybody, and was letting everybody know what was going on. And I was driving, and the whole way I just started praying, and I was like, God, I don't know what this looks like or what is about to happen, but I can't do this on my own.
Yeah.
I can't do this on my own. And so Thursday of that week, I ended up, long story short, through a series of nothing but God moments. My appointments got moved from December to the week of all of that. And so I was going in on Friday to get testing done. And Thursday night I was driving home, and I just started crying and praying. And I said, God, I can't do this on my own. I can't do this on my own. If cancer is part of my story, then you have to take the pen and write it, because I can't do this on my own. And so I think that in those moments, it's easy to want to try to take over, you know, like it's easy to want to say like my world feels like it's crashing in around me and I'm just going to go and do what I want to do. I'm going to go and, you know, do this or do that or whatever. But truly in that moment, I had no other choice.
Yeah.
But to submit to God and to submit to knowing that I was not in that by myself. And for someone who is very independent to have to say like, God, I need you. Like I had no choice. And it was that moment in the car on Thursday night. It was just like, God, if this is part of my story, you have to take the pen. I can't, don't let me hold on to it. Because there are so many times I think we do this throughout our life is like, we'll give something to God and then we take it back. And like, we'll give it to God and we take it back. And we'll give it to God and we take it back. And I'm like, I don't want to take this back. Like, if this is part of my story, if this is something that, you know, whatever, you're going to have to take the pen and hold it and write it. And I'm just going to have to trust you. Which is not something on Tuesday when I went to the doctor that I thought I was going to say come Thursday evening, which I can say that trusting in God was the best thing, you know, because praise the Lord, I no cancer, which is amazing. But I just can't help but think that like what those days would have been like and what that week would have been like had I not just fully submitted in that moment. It wasn't easy.
No.
Like it wasn't easy. Like even simple things. Like I was talking to Keith and Marie and my parents and they were like, stay off the internet. Stay off the internet. And I'm like, no, I don't want to stay off the internet. Like, but it's in those moments, like you instantly, like you hear those things and you like yourself, that self part of you wants to go and see what Google says or what Dr. Google says or what WebMD says or whatever. And like, I feel like that's some of that, like going back and forth of like that self and that submission. And finally, like I was sitting at Keith's house and I was sitting on the couch and I had my phone out and he was like, get off your phone. And I was like, yeah. And I just put it down and I was like, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. My dad had already gone down the rabbit hole and my mom was like, we're not doing this. Like, get off the internet. Like, we're not going to sit here and look up all of these like worst case scenarios because when we do that, we're relying on ourselves in those moments. Like we're relying on stuff that makes no sense until we actually like know for sure and know what God can do. Like there's no sense in stressing and worrying about things that are out of our control at this point. So,
and I love this part of your story that you just shared too, because like Pastor Scott talked at the beginning about like, you know, you don't let the enemy take your kids, you know what I'm saying? And I think like how good and how awesome it is that like you have parents there who are, you know, who are telling you, your mom in that instance, it's even like telling your dad, you know, hey, no, we're going to rely on God in this moment. You know, you guys really like honed in on that finding strength in God and waiting on him in those times, which is something that we see David do in this text as well. Like David, when he faced hardship, he found strength in the Lord. And so I want to ask you, you know, how do you turn to God or share a story of how you've had to turn to God for strength in a moment that was really tough or difficult in your life?
Yeah, I think that most often, like most people's reactions whenever we get some kind of news or something like that is you got to look at like what most people are turning to, right? So, you know, we do turn to the WebMD, we do turn to Dr. Google, like you put it. We get on Facebook, this is going on and blah, 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 and this and that. And I think that those steps, I think there's nothing wrong with that if, like, those things in life are for certain, right? Because I think that asking for prayer is fantastic, especially whenever you do it on social media. And it's always my prayer that people that do comment that they really are praying for me and with me during those times that I'm going through. With the WebMD, I think that that's okay. Maybe prepare yourself for treatment and what that looks like. Okay, how can I prepare myself mentally to know that the road I've got ahead is tough? But after the initial, you know, issue or whatever pops up that's coming through, like you have to take it to God. Like it's one of those, it's a critical and crucial things because it's one of the things that we sit there and we sing and we declare, God, you're in control. You're fighting for me. We've got all these great songs that we sing on Sunday mornings, but if we don't live out those things, and putting our faith and trust in God, that He is fighting for us, He is working on our behalf, He is providing for us before we even know that we need those things. And whenever we do become aware of it, and we make that declaration, and we turn to God saying, God, hey, you knew this situation before me. Like, there is great freedom and great liberty that is found even in the midst of tumultuous situations.
Yeah. I think
whenever
something,
we turn to God.
Yeah, I think something too, like what comes to my mind is like I do think that there is how my brain is not wanting to process what my mouth is trying to say. I think it's easy that when we get those things where we know that we're supposed to submit, or there's things that we need to pray about, or, you know, whatever the case may be. I think that there are times, though, that, like those scary moments, you know what I mean? Like, I think of, for instance, like, you know, you said it, Scott is my brother. And so, you know, it's been 20 years since our grandmother passed away. Yesterday was actually 20 years since she passed away. And that for us was a huge thing. Like, it was massive. And, in those moments, like, I did submit. Like, I did turn to my faith. I turned to what I knew I needed in those moments. Scott turned a completely different direction. Like, he turned to the partying and all of those things. And so, like, I think it's easy in those moments to see that, like, sometimes we take comfort in the wrong things when we're in those, when those storms of life hit or those hard times hit. Sometimes we think that it's easier to take the road less traveled and like turn to those things that we already know that are going to give us quote unquote comfort or quote unquote like strength. Like, we're going to turn to people to validate us. We're going to turn to the internet to, you know, give us relief. We're going to turn to, you know, drugs, alcohol, you know, pornography, like all of these things. Like, people turn to those things thinking that, you know, I've heard this my whole life, but like there's like that God-sized hole in all of us, and we try to fill it with like all of these things. And so I think sometimes in those moments, like, it's easy to say like, oh, well, you know, I'll be fine. I'm going to take care of it myself. And then what we realize is that we filled ourselves with all of this empty promises, and we filled ourselves with all these things are not filling us up by any means, but they're actually emptying us out even more. And when the reality of those situations hit, it's like, oh my goodness, I feel just as bad now as what I did. I used to do a training when I worked at Marshall. I worked at Marshall Health, and I was a prevention education specialist for individuals with substance use disorders. And so I would go out and I would teach programs to kids. And there was a video that we showed, and it talked about this kid who was 16, and he had started using drugs when he was 13. And he said, I started using to numb the pain of everything that was going on in my life. And he said, and what I realized was that when the high wore off, the pain was still there. And so he said, I was filling myself with all these empty promises, and then my pain was still there. And he said, what I realized was that I needed something to actually fix my pain, not to numb it. And I think that's kind of where my head goes with this, like, self versus submission. It's like sometimes when we do that self, it's just a numbing sometimes of like what we know we're supposed to do. Like, we're going to appease the situation. We're going to, you know, do whatever. Or sometimes we spiral ourselves out of control, and then we can't get back to a place of like fully being able to understand. Like, it would have been super easy for me to get on WebMD and say that I was dying by you know what I mean, by Friday, and like, and it would have been awful. And I don't know, had I done that on Tuesday, I don't know if on Thursday night my brain would have been in the same place that it was to pray that prayer of God, take it over.
Yeah.
I honestly think that social media has ruined this kind of aspect for the Christian life because so many times we reach out to other people before we reach out to God. We ask other people to pray for us whenever we haven't spent 1 minute praying for our own situation. It's not wrong to ask people for prayer, and I think that's, like I said, it's a powerful tool. But if you turn to other people before you turn to the Almighty, then your priorities are a little construed.
Yeah, what I think about it when you just post it blanket on social media is like, you apparently have not done what you need to do to have that community, that close-knit community that you can turn to privately.
Yeah.
Than a blanket thing on, because many people who post on there probably ain't actually praying. You know what I mean? Like they'll say, praying.
They put the prayer emoji.
Whatever, but they're not actually stopping and praying.
Correct.
Yeah. But like, I think for us, that's an easy out of, well, I can just throw it on there instead of going to the people that I know. Like,
well, and that was, I will say, I mean, that is literally what I did. And at first, I'll just be honest. At first, I didn't want to tell anybody.
Right.
I didn't. I had told my parents. I had told Scott and Megan. I called Anna because I was supposed to be in a meeting. And then Anna said, I told staff that you'd let them know what was going on. And I'm like, I don't want to let them know what's going on. And then Cheryl called and she's like, I told them you even told me, you were like, I told Jared and them that you'd probably call them and let them know what was going on or something like that. I can't remember what you had said. Yeah. And I was like, yeah. I'm like, I don't want to have to tell anybody else this, but yeah. But like, I knew I needed to in those moments because truthfully in that moment, like, yes, I was praying myself, but I needed people to come alongside me because I truly could not. Yeah. Like, I felt like I was walking through a fog. Like, I felt like I was walking through a fog. Yeah. Like, this is not real life right now.
Yeah. Well, I think that in those times, like, there are times when we don't have the strength.
Yeah.
And having those people that we know, like, to be there with us is incredibly important. And I think that just as much as, us going to God, like, going to those people when we don't have the words or the whatever, like, to say, having those people who can do it for you, I believe that that's as much of, because God's placed those people in your life, you know what I mean? And so I think it's just as much of that as it is anything else. Because I remember, like, when I had my miscarriage, like, before I had the miscarriage, I went to the doctor for the first appointment, and he told us, like, this doesn't look good. He said, there's a chance, though, that you're earlier along. You can come back next week. Everything might be okay. Yeah. He said, but I want to be honest. Usually when I see this, it doesn't progress, whatever. We get in the car. And I'm holding on to next week. You know what I mean? I'm like, Anthony, can you pray? And he, in the prayer, says, but not our will, yours be done, And I was so mad at him because I didn't want to submit in that moment to that. Like, I didn't want that. I was like, no, no. And that whole week, like, I fought with it. I mean, I prayed, I cried, whatever. And when we went back the next week, we found out, in fact, I would miscarry. And it happened the very next day, like, started the very next day. But even in that, like, in that moment, like, my husband was stronger and a little bit more spiritually mature in that moment to submit, even when I couldn't, so then he was able to be there for me. But then I also remember, it's funny because I shared this past weekend with teens at SYC, but that Sunday we were supposed to do a skit live on stage for a relationship series we were doing. And, like, I didn't want to be here. Yeah. I didn't want to do it. I didn't think I could. But I also didn't want to, like, cancel, you know what I mean? Because we'd gotten a lot of really great feedback. It'd been very helpful for people, all these things. And I knew, like, that if I'd have told Pastor Scott and them, like, they would have been like, don't worry about it. We'll just skip it. But we came, and I stood back there with my husband, and What a Beautiful Name came on. And we just worshiped and cried our hearts out, but worshiped. Yeah. And in that moment, like, I felt like God had filled me up, like, to be able to come and still do the thing that I had needed to do, even though it was hard. It wasn't easy. It was difficult. But I think even in that, like, in those moments, like, still worship, still pray, still get in scripture, like, even when it's hard, like, still doing those things you're supposed to do, even when you don't know exactly what to say or what's going to happen, like, still I think that's part of turning to the Lord and like getting strength from him is when you pour in those things, like the scripture, like pour out your heart through worship, like you're pouring out, but he's pouring in at the same instance, that is incredibly beneficial for you in those tough times. So Pastor Scott, and you mentioned it kind of earlier, like there comes a point in time when you're praying for something and you need to actually just move, right? You need to actually just do something. What do you think the balance to that is? Because sometimes people don't pray at all. They move too quick. You know what I mean? So how do you know really like when it's time to move and when you should actually pray? Like what's the balance? How do we do that?
We literally just had this conversation this morning. So I don't know the answer to this fully, but like I had a conversation with someone yesterday. I have been having this one particular person on my mind for about a month now, serving in kids ministry. And I hadn't reached out to them, but I was like, you know what? I need to do this. Like, I could not get them off my mind. I'm like, I really think that they need to be back in kids min. So I stopped them out in the lobby yesterday and I said, hey, so I need you to think about something. I need you to pray about something. And they were like, what? I said, I just really have had you on my mind about like being in kids ministry. And serving in kids ministry, and I want you to pray about it. And it was really cool because their response to me was, no, I don't need to pray about this. You're the third person to ask me, and I know that that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And so, like, I think that there's moments where, like, God kind of, like, places those people to confirm those things with you, like.
So by the time you get to them, they're like, okay, this is for sure a God thing.
And so like it was really cool because I was like, really? And they were like, yeah, like I don't have to pray about this. Like and they even said they're like, I know I'm supposed to be serving. I just haven't really known where. And so like the answer is yes. You're literally the third person to tell me kids ministry, and I know that's where I'm supposed to be. And so like I think that there's moments in that to where it's like sometimes we already know the answer, but we want to keep pushing it off. Yeah. Like, oh no, maybe. And so like, and I think I've talked about this in like one of these two before, but like there was a time a few years ago where like I literally had prayed about something so much and I audibly heard God say, no, not this one. And in my mind, I justified that with like, not this one right now, not this one in this moment, not this one today, or not this one right now in July or in June. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I tried to justify it. And God's like, no, Jessica. I said no. Like, what part of this do you not understand? And I continued to pray about it and continued to pray about it. And it's like, he's already given me the answer. Yeah. Like, get it through your skull. Like, the answer was no. And sometimes I think it's like we still continue to want to pray about it because we think he's going to change his mind. Right. And it's like, no, like he knows better than we do. Like he knows better than we do. But I do think that like there are times where he is going to confirm that with other people. Like even with you, like you came up to me standing right back here when you said, hey, I think that you need to speak. For on a Wednesday night, and I said, no, Scott's the pastor, not me. That's exactly what I told her. I said, Scott's the pastor, not me. That's not for me. And she's like, I need you to really think and pray about it. And I prayed about it, and I was like, I ain't doing this. Like, but and every time she'd be like, have you prayed about it? I'm like, yeah, I prayed about it. And then she's like, you sure? And I'm like, I'm still not doing it. And then finally she's like, so what did you decide? And I said, I'm supposed to do it. I just don't want to do it. And I knew the entire time I was supposed to do it, but I continued to tell her I'm going to pray about it.
Yeah. How much crazy things for the kingdom have been just put off or just not even done because of this Moses complex that we all tend to get. Whenever God asks you to do something, we make up every excuse in the world to not do it. Yeah. And it drives me insane because I do it myself as well. And I think, gosh, like how different would things look in our own city in our own church, in our own community, if
Yeah.
whenever God asked us to do something, we didn't sit there and go, well, I'm just a bumbling idiot. I don't have the right tools. I mean, because that's what Moses said. He said, I'm not built to be a communicator. I don't have the right tools. I don't have the right people around me. And God every single time said,
Yeah.
look, don't worry about that. I'm asking you to go do it.
Yeah.
And we say no to giving. We say no to jumping in and making, starting a group. We say no to volunteering down at the food shelter. We say no to all these different things because we make up excuses. My time, I don't have the money, I don't have this, I don't have that. And God is just saying, I've already given you the things that you need to do to say yes. All you have to do, and I've made it easy for you, is just say yes. He has set us up for success. He has set us up for life everlasting and overflowing and abundant. And we keep on telling him no.
Yeah. Or we tell other people, we tell him no by telling other people we'll pray about it.
Yes.
I think we do that sometimes.
And I think it's one of those things.
We make up these excuses for telling God no.
But there are literally...
We're going to stand in front of him one day, and we're going to have to look him in the face, and he's going to go, hey, you remember that one time I told you to do that thing? And you're going to go,
I prayed about it.
I prayed about it. But he's gonna, we have to give an account for these things.
Yeah.
And there's no good excuse that we're gonna be able to tell Jesus.
Yeah.
Whenever we get in front of him, there's nothing. We're gonna sit there and go, dang.
Yeah.
I messed up.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why, Pastor Scott has said it multiple times. There are certain things you just don't need to pray for. Like God tells us to be generous, so be generous. You maybe need to pray about how much you need to be generous or what you need to be generous to, but then you do it, right?
Yeah.
But it's not a fact of whether I need to give or not.
And if
yes,
you're married,
you should give.
pray it over with your spouse.
Yes, yeah. So there are dynamics like that. Yeah, absolutely. Should I serve? Absolutely, I should.
We're called
Where
to serve.
should I serve? When should I serve? Those things, pray about those things. But honestly, also inviting other people in, as it's kind of been that thing, even for David, right? He went to the priest. He went to the one surviving priest that he ended up joining forces with, He went to him to help seek God on his behalf. And so sometimes it is not just us. Sometimes if you feel stuck, you're supposed to take a next step and you feel stuck, inviting somebody else in. I knew, I felt stuck in the whole, whether or not to go back to school thing and what and when that next step looked like for me. And I felt like I needed to go even outside of here to get that, help me get unstuck in that situation and in that prayer. And so I met up with a pastor at another church, and I highly respect her and her opinion on things, and we talked and we prayed and I cried and but we found what that next step looks like for me, and now I literally made it happen and started it within the next week. Because once it became clear, it was easy to do. Everything fell into place. And I think that's the other thing is when it's time, things fall into place. So for him, it was time. That conversation happened. It's going to just happen easy. He's going to be back there in no time at all because now he's made that decision and it is the right next step. And now it'll happen. Yeah. I think when you hit some roadblocks, and things, then that's maybe the time to be okay, I should have gotten one of these 100 jobs I've applied for and interviewed for at this point, but God keeps closing the doors. Yeah. So maybe I need to step back and pray on this a little bit more, because maybe the direction that God wants me to go is something different than what I'm trying to do on my own. Yeah. And I need to seek something different. And so there's those moments, I think, that if it's not working out, because God does give you what you need. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's already gone before you, right? Yep. And so if it's not happening, maybe that's a moment to, let me step back and pray a little bit more. Sometimes, yes, it could be the enemy trying to block you. But I think that's where wisdom and discernment and bringing somebody else into the conversation is helpful to help you discern, to help you understand in those moments. Yeah. So really, I would say, if you're stuck, invite somebody else in. Yeah. And try to help take that next step. But yeah, so if you are somebody who has been trying to rely on yourself and not submitting to God, we hope that you'll take that step to really just see how that submissive life is actually going to benefit you so much better than trying to do it on your own. And community is important.
Yeah.
And so we would love to just be there for you. If you're somebody that's feeling stuck in those things, any of us would love to have a conversation with you. You can reach out, message us, or join us if you're local on Sundays at 9 and 11 at Southridge Church. But we will be back here again next week with another episode and our final episode from our Rise and Fall series right here on the Extra Point podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.